David, the shepherd boy, who spent much of his life in the wilderness, has just slain the giant Goliath. He is now a hero in the eyes of the people of Israel, and his whole world is about to change, but not necessarily in the way we might expect. Let's see what happens with David next. I'm in chapter 18, verse 1, reading from the New American Standard Version. Now it came about when he had finished speaking to Saul that the soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as himself. In the last chapter, I said, "Where is Jonathan?" as Goliath was coming out day after day, taunting the people of Israel. We know that Jonathan was a man of great faith himself. We saw that in chapter 14. Yet in this instance, we didn't see Jonathan step forward to accept Goliath's challenge. That moment had been ordained by God for David. But it's not surprising that Jonathan's soul would be knit to David's. He saw David's faith and courage. He heard David's devotion to God and his desire to bring God glory. Jonathan saw how David was clinging to God. He knew they were soul brothers. Verse 2, Saul took him that day and did not let him return to his father's house. I'm reminded of 1 Samuel 14:52, which said, "Now the war against the Philistines was severe all the days of Saul. And when Saul saw any mighty man or any valiant man, he attached him to his staff." Saul saw a mighty warrior in David and wanted to keep him close. Continuing verse 3, "Then Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as himself. Jonathan stripped himself of the robe that was on him and gave it to David with his armor, including his sword and his bow and his belt." I absolutely love this. As the son of Saul, Jonathan is a prince and an heir to the throne, but he sees God's anointing on David. Instead of holding on to whatever rights he may think he has or being given to envy, he willingly takes off his princely robe and his armor and gives them to David. And remember, Jonathan and King Saul had been the only ones who had a sword, and he gives that to David as well, and they enter into a covenant. Beautiful, selfless, brotherly love. Continuing verse 5, "So David went out wherever Saul sent him and prospered. And Saul set him over the men of war. And it was pleasing in the sight of all the people and also in the sight of Saul's servants. It happened as they were coming, when David returned from killing the Philistine, that the women came out of all the cities of Israel, singing and dancing to meet King Saul, with tambourines, with joy, and with musical instruments. The women sang as they played and said, 'Saul has slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s. David is the man now. He is known throughout all Israel, has great favor with the people, and I love that it springs from his faith in God. But verse 8, "Then Saul became very angry, for this saying displeased him. And he said, 'They have ascribed to David 10,000s, but to me they have ascribed thousands. Now what more can he have but the kingdom?' Saul looked at David with suspicion from that day on." Remember, Saul knows that his kingdom will not endure. Samuel told him that God had appointed someone else to be ruler over his people, a man after his own heart. Now he's thinking David might be that man. He says, what more can he have but the kingdom. Like Jonathan, Saul sees God's anointing on David, but he regards it very differently. He's angry and jealous. Now it came about on the next day that an evil spirit from God came mightily upon Saul, and he raved in the midst of the house, while David was playing the harp with his hand as usual. And a spear was in Saul's hand. Saul hurled the spear, for he thought, I will pin David to the wall. But David escaped from his presence twice. This is interesting to me that David is now over the men of war, yet he's still ministering to Saul on the harp. We know that the Spirit of God has departed from Saul, and he's now being tormented by this evil spirit, which is why David was brought in to minister to him. So I wonder what David is thinking when Saul hurls a spear at him. He probably thinks Saul is just this unwitting victim of the evil spirit. The devil made him do it. But Saul is responsible for his actions, and he knows exactly what he's doing. He's allowing his anger and jealousy to fester, and he actually thinks to himself, I'm going to pin David to the wall. I will kill him. But he can't kill David because he's under God's protection. Verse 12, now Saul was afraid of David, for the Lord was with him, but had departed from Saul. Once again, Saul sees God's hand upon David. It's obvious. Continuing verse 13, therefore Saul removed him from his presence and appointed him as his commander of 1,000. And he went out and came in before the people. David was prospering in all his ways, for the Lord was with him. When Saul saw that he was prospering greatly, he dreaded him. But all Israel and Judah loved David, and he went out and came in before them. Such an interesting study in contrast in this chapter. We see David increasing in favor among the people. He's prospering in all his ways. Jonathan loves David. All Israel and Judah love David. At the same time, Saul's hatred of David is growing. He's afraid of David. He dreads David. Verse 17, then Saul said to David, here is my older daughter Merab. I will give her to you as a wife. Only be a valiant man for me and fight the Lord's battles. For Saul thought, my hand shall not be against him, but let the hand of the Philistines be against him. Now, did Saul forget what he promised to the man who would kill Goliath? We do not see him fulfilling the promise to enrich the man, to make his father's house free in Israel, to give him his daughter in marriage. Here he talks of giving David his daughter, but he attaches a new condition. He has to fight against the Philistines. And of course, we see the motive. He wants the Philistines to be the ones to put David to death. But David said to Saul, who am I? And what is my life or my father's family in Israel that I should be the king's son-in-law? So it came about at the time when Merab, Saul's daughter, should have been given to David, that she was given to Adriel, the Maholatite, for a wife. Now Michal, Saul's daughter, loved David. When they told Saul, the thing was agreeable to him. Now 2 of Saul's own children loved David, Jonathan and Michal. God's sovereignty is amazing. He's given David great favor with 2 people in Saul's inner circle who will end up helping David. Continuing verse 21, Saul thought, I will give her to him that she may become a snare to him, and that the hand of the Philistines may be against him. Therefore Saul said to David, for a second time, you may be my son-in-law today. Then Saul commanded his servants, speak to David secretly, saying, Behold, the king delights in you, and all his servants love you. Now therefore, become the king's son-in-law. So Saul's servants spoke these words to David. But David said, Is it trivial in your sight to become the king's son-in-law, since I am a poor man and lightly esteemed? Humble David, I'm not worthy to marry the king's daughter. But his humility is messing up Saul's plan. The servants of Saul reported to him according to these words which David spoke. Saul then said, Thus you shall say to David, The king does not desire any dowry except 100 foreskins of the Philistines, to take vengeance on the king's enemies. Now Saul planned to make David fall by the hand of the Philistines. When his servants told David these words, it pleased David to become the king's son-in-law. Before the days had expired, David rose up and went, he and his men, and struck down 200 men among the Philistines. Then David brought their foreskins, and they gave them in full number to the king, that he might become the king's son-in-law. So Saul gave him Michal, his daughter, for a wife. David a warrior or what? Oh, I can fight to win her hand? Let's go. Saul said you have to kill 100 Philistines, thinking that'll get David killed. David killed twice that. God all over him. And Saul knows it. When Saul saw and knew that the Lord was with David, and that Michal, Saul's daughter, loved him, then Saul was even more afraid of David. Thus Saul was David's enemy continually. Then the commanders of the Philistines went out to battle, and it happened as often as they went out that David behaved himself more wisely than all the servants of Saul. So his name was highly esteemed. The last chapter was David versus Goliath, and even in this chapter we see David versus the Philistines. But the real story now is Saul versus David. In verse 17, King Saul said, My hand shall not be against him, but let the hand of the Philistines be against him. That was plan A. It didn't work. So we'll see what Saul's up to next time. 3 times in this chapter it said the Lord was with David. And the people could see that. Saul could see that. And more than once in this chapter it said, and David prospered. That is the fruit of clinging to God. Prospering in the Lord doesn't mean that everything will go well with us in the way we might want it to. But knowing that God is with you, that his blessing and favor are on your life, nothing compares to that. What do people see when they look at your life? Do they see that God is with you? Do they see your faith in him? Do they see that you are prospering in him? That no matter what circumstances may bring, you are abounding in faith and peace and in devotion to the Lord. When we cling to God, it is evident to others. May our lives show the fruit of devotion to Jesus.